Good evening, everyone. So good to see all of you. Good evening and welcome to a conversation with Haben Girma, presented by the Palomar College Disability Resource Center and Student Accessibility Services of Maricosta College. I am Dr. Shauna Moriarty, Director of the Disability Resource Center at Palomar College. We are overjoyed to host Haben Girma this evening as she shares her story of becoming an advocate and what communities can do to become more inclusive. Haben is a true champion of disability justice, and we are looking forward to her presentation. Before we begin, I want to recognize members of our audience. Joining us tonight is Palomar College Governing Board Secretary Kartik Raju. We also have Maricosta College Governing Board member George McNeil and Dr. Sunita Sunny Cook, Superintendent, President of Maricosta Community College District. We are thrilled to have you with us. Events like this would not be possible without the encouragement and support of our district leaders. Throughout our personal and professional lives, we find people who challenge us to do better, to lead substantial change, and allow us to grow as individuals. Tonight, it is my honor to introduce one of those people, Dr. Star Rivera-Lacey. I'm looking for her. She joined the Palomar College Community District as Superintendent President in July 2021. Dr. Rivera-Lacey's commitment to social justice drives her passion for educational reform. We are grateful to work with and be led by Dr. Rivera-Lacey. Please welcome Superintendent President Dr. Star Rivera-Lacey.
Hello and welcome, everybody. When I was given this honor of being able to introduce Haben, I felt overwhelmed and overjoyed. I've been a fan for a very long time. So having said that, I will go into a formal introduction. First of all, thank you, Dr. Moriarty, and thank you to our colleagues in the Disability Resource Center here at Palomar College, and also to Student Accessibility Services at Maricosta College. It's because of their collaboration and dedication that this event is even possible. So thank you very much. Let's see. Haben Girma is recognized as the first deafblind person to graduate from Harvard Law School. She's a human rights lawyer dedicated to advancing disability justice. President Obama named her a White House Champion of Change. She received the Helen Keller Achievement Award, a spot on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, and has been featured in Time 100 Talks with the World's Most Influential People. President Bill Clinton, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Chancellor Angela Merkel have all honored Haben. The New York Times, Oprah Magazine, and the Today Show have featured her memoir, Haben, the deafblind woman who conquered Harvard Law. Haben believes disability is an opportunity for innovation, and she teaches organizations about the importance of choosing inclusion. Please join me in welcoming the amazing Haben Girma. Thank you.
Down. Good boy. All right, my dog is ready, technology is ready, and I think I'm ready. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be here. I have not been connected in person with students and professors for a very long time. So it's really powerful to actually be sharing the room with many of you and a virtual room with other students and professors. My name is Haben Girma. As you heard, I'm deaf-blind. I have limited vision and hearing. So accessing things through sight or sound are very tricky, and I had to learn to find alternative ways to access information. When I was growing up, I missed a lot of things. People would wave at me from across the room, and I wouldn't see it, and they would think I was being rude. Or they'd call my name, and I wouldn't hear it, and they'd be disappointed. So I had to find a solution that used senses that work well, like my sense of touch. And that led me to connecting a Braille computer with an external keyboard. Very few people know Braille. Very few people know sign language. But lots of people know how to type, especially millennials. So that is the system I've been using, and it's the system I'm using today. I'm going to hold up the Braille computer. So it's a display with Braille along the bottom. And during the introductions, my typist was typing what was being said. I was reading it in Braille, and that's how I access it. When there's feedback from the audience, when people smile, laugh, look at their phones, I'm also getting that feedback. And we will have a Q&A at the end. Some of you will have the opportunity to use the keyboard and see communication through the Braille display happening real time. We'll also be taking questions virtually, so you can also submit questions virtually for those who want to have their questions answered during the end. I'm going to be talking about disability justice, and the biggest barrier I faced as a disabled person is ableism. Ableism is the system of treating disabled people as inferior to non-disabled people. When I was growing up, I heard, "Oh, poor thing, she'll never go to school, she'll never get a job." Those kinds of assumptions and beliefs are examples of ableism. And it also comes up in government policies and healthcare. We've noticed that a lot during the pandemic, when disabled lives were valued less and still continue to be treated as though our lives are valued less to non-disabled lives. And once I started being able to name what was happening, ableism, I started to learn how to resist it and encourage other people to also advocate and push back against it. But that takes time. We build up to it. We learn about it. I wasn't born an advocate. I was warned when I was in school that 70% of blind people are unemployed. And the statistics for deaf-blind people are even higher. So if I wanted to be successful, get a job, I would need to work twice as hard as sighted hearing people. And I did. I worked really hard in school. I was volunteering in my community, but still employers didn't want to hire me. One of my friends told me, "I know where you can get a job, Alaska." So I went up to Alaska, and they were right. There are lots of jobs in Juneau, Alaska during the summer. Tourists come up to see the whales, the glaciers, and there were tons of job openings online on all the job sites. I sent in applications. Employers were impressed with my experiences, and they'd call me in for interviews. As soon as they realized I'm disabled, they came up with all kinds of excuses not to hire me. These were tactile jobs. They did not require sight. Washing dishes, folding laundry. My parents made me do chores when I was growing up, so I had lots of experience in this field. But employers still assumed that a deaf-blind person couldn't wash dishes. And if I couldn't get a job as a dishwasher, what else would there be for me? What could I do? It was scary and alarming, and at that time, I did not have the word ableism. I did not know that this was a systemic problem facing lots of disabled people with all kinds of disabilities all across the country and all across the world. But once I learned the word ableism, it helped me learn to resist it and fight it and find solutions. Disabled people do need to work hard and study hard to be successful, but we also need employers to break down ableism, or schools and professors to break down ableism so we can have fully inclusive communities and disabled people can share their talents, even if it's washing dishes. I eventually found a friend of a friend who was hiring, and she believed in my abilities, and she hired me to work the front desk of her small gym in Juneau, Alaska. One day that summer, a woman came up to the front desk and she told me a treadmill isn't working. I followed her to the treadmill, and there were lots of buttons along the top of the machine. I tried the various buttons. Nothing happened. Then I felt the machine from top to bottom, and near the bottom there's a switch. I flicked the switch, and the machine whirred to life. The woman told me, "Oh my goodness, I didn't see that switch." I told her I didn't see it either. Sometimes tactile techniques beat visual techniques. Disabled people are talented. We find alternative ways to do things, and we need employers, professors, all members of our community to believe in our abilities and allow us to develop and share these alternative techniques that we develop. There are awesome anti-ableist people out there, and their numbers are growing. And the more people we teach about ableism, the more people can help join us in removing ableism and making our communities more accessible. I've traveled all over the world meeting with students to talk about disability justice. And disabled people, especially disabled students, have been coming up with strategies and alternative techniques all over the world and all throughout history. These stories are often hidden. We need more people to recognize and celebrate these stories, to celebrate that disabled people are talented and do have gifts to share. I want to share a video from a visit to a university in Mexico, Instituto Tecnológico de Sonora. Crystal, can you play the first video? So we have a video from the university where I'm standing in a gymnasium signing with my friend who back then was a student, but now is a teacher. And he is watching me sign. He's sighted deaf. I'm deaf-blind, so I'm feeling his signs, holding my hands over his hands to feel the signs. Deaf people are talented. If one can't hear language, one can create visual language. And deaf communities around the world have created sign languages. The dominant one in the US is American Sign Language. In France, there's French Sign Language. Across the pond in the UK, there's a completely different language and it makes no sense to me. They call it British Sign Language. Deaf-blind people are also innovative. If you can't see or hear language, you can have tactile language, such as a braille computer and keyboard, or tactile sign language, as shown in the video, and many other forms of communication that people have developed over the years. Because we're innovative, we find solutions. There are lots of alternative ways to connect and share information. I'll have another example. Crystal, next slide. In this video, I'm salsa dancing at a club in New York City. When I'm dancing, I can't hear the beat in the music. I can't see the other dancers, but I can feel the beat through the hands and shoulders of the people I'm dancing with. Sometimes we don't share the language of English. I've danced in many different places, India, Dubai, Costa Rica. One time I tried dancing in Washington, D.C., and they told me, sorry, you can't come in. No dogs. I explained that the dog with me is a seeing eye dog, well-trained, well-behaved. They won't cause any problems. And they still insisted, no, you can't come in, no dogs. I told them the Americans with Disabilities Act says everywhere the public can go, guide dogs can go. Restaurants, hotels, taxis, and they still insisted you can't come in. My disability does not stop me from dancing, but ableism can stop me from dancing. A lot of disabled people struggle to access sports and recreation. Many instructors, coaches assume disabled people can't participate, and that's very frustrating. It can bring one a lot of joy and community to be able to engage in sports and recreation. It's also okay not to engage in sports and recreation as long as it's a choice. And for a lot of disabled people, it's not even a choice. So we need more people to help fight ableism within sports and recreation classes and programs. When I've been successful, it's because people in my community have helped to do the work of removing barriers. One of my favorite examples is a high school teacher who asked me one day, do you want to try surfing? And I thought, how would a blind person surf? I didn't even know Black women who surf. And I told them, sure, let's give it a try. So they introduced me to a program called Ride a Wave that takes disabled students tandem surfing. Crystal, next video. So we have a video of me tandem surfing. Tandem boards are longer, larger boards. The water guide is near the back of the board. I'm near the front. The water guide helps steer around other surfers and sharks. I loved the experience. It was amazing to feel the vibrations of the surfboard under my feet. The sun, the water, tandem is beautiful, but I was asking myself, what are my limits? How do I test those limits? And I started asking instructors and coaches, can I take surf lessons? And they told me, we've never heard of a deaf-blind surfer. Then I found one program that said, we've never heard of a deaf-blind surfer, but let's try, let's figure it out. And we had a lesson. Next video. In this one, I'm on a smaller surfboard, and that gave me the opportunity to practice standing up and riding the wave. Beside me on a separate surfboard is the instructor, and he's staying close to help steer around other surfers and sharks. There have been so many programs, classes, organizations that say, sorry, we've never had a disabled person. If you've never had a disabled person in a program, that's a sign that there are barriers. Barriers to entry, barriers to advancement. Sometimes there are physical barriers, like stairs that prevent access for people with mobility disabilities. Sometimes there's social barriers, such as ableist assumptions that say, oh, a deaf-blind person can't surf or do these other things. If there are programs that have never had disabled students or have very few disabled students, take the time to investigate what are the barriers and commit to removing those barriers. It's also incredibly powerful to have faculty members and instructors who are disabled as well. Students should have role models and see themselves represented among the leaders in a community. So look for barriers at all levels and do the work to remove those barriers so we can have inclusive communities. I am an advocate for disability rights now. It took me a long time to get there. I remember when I was in college, I felt very shy, and it was awkward and difficult to ask for what I needed and request accommodations. I went to Lewis and Clark in Portland, Oregon, and they had never had a Braille reader before, but they committed to doing the work to buy a Braille printer, to get Braille translation software, and their reading specialist took the time to learn how to convert print to Braille so I'd have all my books and exams in Braille. There was just one problem. The college cafeteria had their menus only in print. I can't read print. And I explained to the cafeteria manager that I can't read print, but I can read Braille, and I can read emails and websites that are coded for accessibility. The manager said, we're very busy. We have over 1,000 students. We don't have time to do special things for students with special needs. Just to be clear, eating is not a special need. There's the myth that there are two kinds of people, dependent and independent. That's not true. All of us are interdependent. We learned that more than ever during the pandemic. All of us depend on someone at some point. Many of you like drinking coffee. Very few of you grow your own coffee beans. You depend on other people to grow the coffee beans. And that's okay as long as we're honest about the fact that everyone is interdependent. The college cafeteria manager did not seem to understand this, so I was stuck not having access to the menus. I was a vegetarian back then, and it's really hard to eat vegetarian when you don't have access to food information. There were about 6 different stations at the cafeteria. So I'd go to a station at random, get food, find a table, try the food. There were some unpleasant surprises. But I told myself, just be grateful. Millions of people around the world struggle for food. Who was I to complain? My mother, when she was my age, was a refugee in Sudan. Who was I to complain? Maybe this was a lesson that disabled people should get used to inferior service. This went on for a long time. And I tried really hard to just accept it and not complain. I talked to friends. I did research online. And that's when I learned about the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I took that information and I went back to the manager and I told him, the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against students with disabilities. If you don't provide access to the menus, I'm going to take legal action. I had no idea how to do that. I was just 19. I couldn't afford a lawyer. Now I know there are nonprofit legal centers supporting students with disabilities. But back then I didn't know that. All I knew is I had to try. I had to do something. The next day, the manager apologized and promised to make the menus accessible. They started emailing the menus on time, regularly, in accessible formats. So I could use my Braille computer and read those emails. If the email said, Station 4, cheese tortellini, I could use my white cane to navigate all the way to Station 4. Life became delicious. The next year, there was a new blind student at the college, and he had immediate access to the menus. That taught me when I advocate, it helps the students who come to the school after me. Our communities have lots of small barriers impacting women, disabled people, people of color, and oftentimes we tell ourselves, it's a small thing, just deal with it. It's just menus. It's just cafeteria seating. And we try to just tolerate it. When you take the time to address a seemingly small barrier, you build up your skills to master the larger obstacles. I wanted to build up my skills, and I felt law school would help me build up those skills. So I started applying to law schools. Harvard Law School got back to me, and they said they never had a deaf-blind student before. I told them I've never been to Harvard Law School before. We didn't know what all the solutions would be, but we would engage in an interactive process to find those solutions and make it work. People often ask, what was the hardest thing at Harvard Law School? The hardest thing was ableism. It came up in all kinds of ways. I'll give an example. We had a networking event where they brought in attorneys from the Boston area to meet with the law students and talk to us about careers and maybe even job opportunities at their own law firms. I was standing near the center of the room. My Braille computer and keyboard were on the table. My guide dog was on the floor beside me. On the other side of the table was my interpreter typing descriptions of what was going on. People were talking, and I asked for one of the attorneys to come over. He came over, but he would not talk to me. He only spoke to the interpreter. He said, "Wow, what a beautiful dog. Does the dog go to class with her? It must be a smart dog." I spoke up and I said, "My interpreter's typing everything you're saying, and I'm reading it in Braille. I know this can be confusing. Maybe it'll clarify things if you try typing. Would you like to try typing?" And again, he would not talk to me. He only spoke to the interpreter. He told her, "Oh no, I'm enjoying watching you two. Tell her she's very inspiring." And he walked away. A lot of disabled people don't like the word inspiring. It's often used as a disguise for pity. Someone might say, "I'm inspired to stop complaining because my life isn't as bad as yours." That kind of thinking, that kind of argument actually hurts disabled people. It continues marginalization. I am okay with the word inspiring if it's used toward action. For example, if someone said, "I'm inspired to make my classroom more accessible. I'm inspired to increase hiring of disabled people." That's a positive kind of inspiration that I'll get behind. So before you use words, pause and think about, what do you mean when you're saying a disabled person is inspiring? And I like to ask, if you're inspired, what are you inspired to do? Find an action. Allow the emotion of inspiration to guide you toward that action that will make our communities more accessible. I graduated from Harvard in 2013, and I have the photo to prove it. Crystal, photo please. We have a photo from graduation. Dean Minnow is handing me my diploma. The dean and I are wearing academic regalia, and my guide dog is wearing a fancy fur coat. What I've been doing is called image descriptions. I've been describing the videos and photos. It helps provide access for anyone who's accessing this presentation through sound only or through text only. Maybe it's because someone is blind. Maybe it's because someone is multitasking. Maybe they're parenting or doing something that they need multiple senses to use. When we provide information in multiple formats, sound, visuals, tactile, smell, taste, whatever that's possible, we reach more people and we make information more accessible. So one way you can make information online more accessible is if you add image descriptions to photos when you post photos on social media, especially any photos about this event. Add image descriptions so we can make sure it's fully accessible. There is a history to Harvard that a lot of people might not know. Harvard was not always accessible. Helen Keller really wanted to go to Harvard, but back then they only admitted men. Her disability didn't hold her back. Her gender didn't hold her back. It was the community at Harvard that chose to exclude women. Over time, the community changed and opened its doors to women, people of color, and disabled people. Disabled women have always been talented. It was Harvard that denied us access, and it was Harvard that needed to change. They've come a long way since Helen's time, but they still have more work to do. And all of us, all of society, still has more work to do to make our communities more inclusive. If you encounter someone who doesn't understand why accessibility is important, I'm going to give you some arguments you can use to convince them to invest in accessibility. Next slide. So on this slide, we have several arguments. The first one is you reach more people when you invest in accessibility. In the US, we have over 61 million disabled people. And around the world, there are over 1 billion disabled people, over 1.3 billion disabled people. So you reach more people, more students, a larger talent pool for instructors when you invest in accessibility. Another argument, specifically for digital content, is you'll make it more discoverable when you invest in accessibility. When you add captions and transcripts to your videos, image descriptions to your photos, more text will be associated with your content, meaning more people, disabled and non-disabled, will find your content. Another argument is disability drives innovation. When you invest in accessibility, you may discover new opportunities. And another phrase for this is the curb cut effect. The city of Berkeley installed curb cuts so folks who use wheelchairs and other mobility devices can have increased freedom and mobility around the city. Parents pushing strollers benefited from the curb cuts. Kids with skateboards loved the curb cuts. And now, autonomous delivery robots benefit from the curb cuts. I doubt in the 60s and 70s, the city of Berkeley imagined these small delivery robots using the curb cuts. When you invest in accessibility, you literally pave the way for greater access for the entire community, disabled people, non-disabled people, and robots. So if you encounter a stubborn person who doesn't understand why we should bother about accessibility, tell them they'll reach more people, they'll increase content discovery, they'll drive innovation, and if they're still not convinced, tell them about legal requirements. Litigation is expensive and time-consuming. It's much easier to choose inclusion rather than dealing with lawyers. Some people may struggle to imagine what digital accessibility entails. So I have a short video that demos how blind and deaf-blind people might be using accessible digital products. Video, please. So when I'm using my phone, I use VoiceOver. VoiceOver can speak out loud and send information to the digital braille display.
News. Checking for news. National Geographic. Unread. World's largest rodents on lam from Toronto Zoo.
I'm panning right on the braille display using the advanced forward button. If I wanted to instead use hand gestures on the iPhone, I could flick right with one finger. To open an item, I can double tap anywhere on the screen.
Text size. Caption. Title. Title. World's large title. After escaping from the High Park Zoo in Canada, 2 capybaras have eluded capture by Jason Biddle. Published June 9. Most people do their best to avoid rodents of unusual size. But after a pair of capybaras escaped from Toronto's High Park Zoo on May alert. Gordon. Hi, I'm at the door sushi. Pot of food. Fish cake with swirl design.
My friend's at the door, so I'm just gonna let him know.
Close. Button. Reply. Button. Messages notification. Hang. in, there. I'm almost done with this demo. Send button.
VoiceOver has allowed me to access more information, news, mail, and messages, and it's also a way for me to know when friends are at the door.
That is an example of one very mainstream news app. That is not a special news app for disabled people. It's a mainstream app. Sometimes when I talk about accessibility, people think, oh, a special separate class for disabled people, a special separate program for disabled people. Separate is never equal. It starts out with good intentions, but down the line, that program, that app ends up with fewer resources, fewer updates. So what we want is one app, one school that's accessible to everyone. And we can do that when we design for inclusion and actively work to find ableism and remove it from our communities. Next slide. In 2015, I met with President Obama to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And in this photo, I am at a table reading from my Braille computer, and on the other side of the table is former President Obama typing on the keyboard, and current President Joe Biden and also Valerie Jarrett are in the photo watching the conversation. So many people, when I explain that I'm deafblind and access information best through Braille, they get uncomfortable. They try to avoid me or keep me from being at the table. President Obama graciously switched from voicing to typing so I can access his words and participate in the conversation. Inclusion is a choice. It's the small and big decisions we make to make our communities more inclusive. And when you choose inclusion, you role model it for everyone else around you. Next slide. I want to teach more people to notice ableism, and I wrote a book called Haben, the Deaf-Blind Woman Who Conquered Harvard Law. And is the book cover on screen? Do we have that slide? Oh yes, we do. Excellent. So the book cover's on screen. My social media contact information is also on screen. On Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, it's at Haben Girma. So you're welcome to share information online. And again, use image descriptions if you're going to post photos about this event. If you're sharing videos, have captions and transcripts so our digital information is fully accessible. We're going to open it up for questions. And everyone who wants to be able to ask a question can line up by the side of the table that's up here on stage. And we'll bring the keyboard onto the table so you can type your question. I'll read it and respond by voice. We're also going to take some questions virtually. So those of you who are watching virtually can also submit questions. And I'm going to transition to the table. Thank you.
So now is our question and answer period.
Down.
We are going to be selecting two folks to be able to ask Haben a question. We have Lori and Leanne here. So if you're interested in asking a question of Haben, go ahead and raise your hand. And Lori and Leanne will select you, and you'll come to the stage where Dan Dryden is waiting. We will also be getting a question from our Zoom audience after this. I think we got one more person. Excellent. Okay, great.
My name is Mattia. Great to meet you, Mattia. What accessibility achievement are you most proud of? After law school, I worked at a law firm, and we brought class action cases advancing the Americans with Disabilities Act. And one of my favorite cases was on behalf of the National Federation of the Blind to make a library more accessible. NFB v. Script, the library is Script, and their website and app was not accessible to blind readers. And I feel blind readers should have access to books, just like sighted people. And originally, Script said they didn't have to make their library accessible because they felt the ADA only applies to physical places, not virtual places. But I disagreed, and my team disagreed. So we took them to court, and the judge held that Script and virtual places are subject to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And after that, Script agreed to work with the NFB to make their library accessible. There's still a lot of people who think virtual content, websites and apps don't have to be accessible, or autonomous vehicles or space shuttles don't have to be accessible. But disabled people do use tech, and we deserve to have equal access to tech. So those are some of the cases I'm most proud of. Thank you, Mattia. Hello. My name is Carla. I want to let you know what an honor it is to have you speak at our school. I'm also a person with a disability. And recently, our community had a great victory with PNV LACCD and Desperate Impact. Which many people don't know or speak about. But it's a silent, unintentional discrimination against people with disabilities. I absolutely agree. So we have had 2 cases in recent history trying to destroy the Americans with Disabilities Act, arguing that if someone didn't mean to discriminate against disabled people, oops, it was an accident, that they should be excused and not have to be forced to make their services or programs or schools fully accessible. And that would be a disaster, because so much of ableism is unintentional. That is kind of the whole basis of ableism. It's unintentional. People don't realize they're causing harm. So I'm really, really grateful that the petitions, thousands of people signed the petition, lots of people advocated to have the Los Angeles Community College District withdraw their petition to the Supreme Court. That was an amazing recent victory, and I hope we can continue with that. We need to do something so that we can prevent future organizations, whether it's another school or a company, from trying to destroy the ADA. I have to get into disability law. I'm a big legal nerd and have been a legal assistant for many years and have been discriminated against as well. We desperately need. So I am rolling back civil rights for people with disabilities. We need more disability rights lawyers, so I'm happy to hear you're interested in going into disability law so we can protect the ADA and make sure our civil rights remain in the future. Thank you, girl. You're welcome. Hi, Haben. My name is Alyssa. I'm asking questions from our virtual audience. I was hoping to get your opinion on people first language. There is a lot of a push on using person first language, but it seems that you do not typically use this form of language. What are your thoughts on the people first language? First and foremost, respect the choices of the person you're talking about. So if someone tells me they identify as a person with a disability, I will honor that for them. If someone says they identify with identity first language, I will honor that for them. For me, I mostly use identity first language. I think it's important to take pride in all the different ways we're human. We are multidimensional. Our disabilities are one part of us, and we should be able to acknowledge and celebrate that. In our language, we say woman, not someone with a special gender, or a human who is a woman. So we should be able to be direct when talking about our disabilities as well. And I feel identity first language is more direct and less clunky compared to person first language. One more. Do you have recommendations for employees with accessibility needs that have been unable to successfully negotiate accommodations with their employer? That is tricky. So there are multiple levels to that. First, try as hard and as much as you can to educate your employers. There are tools like the Job Accommodation Network, askjan.org, which has tools for employees and employers discussing various accommodations, how to make it work, how to get those accommodations. So use Ask Jan as a resource. Talk to other disabled people. Find disabled mentors to help you to build up your advocacy skills so you can advocate for the accommodations you need at work. If that is still not working, then there are nonprofit organizations as well as for-profit organizations helping to advocate and end employment discrimination. There are organizations like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So those are some resources. I also accept that everyone is at different stages. Some of us struggle with advocacy fatigue. Sometimes you are too tired and overwhelmed to advocate, to deal with litigation if it gets to that stage. And that's okay too. We need advocates, but more than that, we need people to take care of themselves and make sure their health and well-being are well cared for. So lots of things to factor in and consider in trying to advocate for accommodations. Thank you. This was our last question. So for those of you who are in the room, after this I will be outside near the front of the building, and I'll be there for a while to meet with anyone, take pictures, or take follow-up questions. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone, and thank you so much, Haben. Thanks, Gordon. It's just wonderful to see everyone here and all of those connecting to us and with us via Zoom. It's such an honor to get to meet Haben and wonderful to see everyone. We are going to work now on recognizing that disability drives innovation, and we're going to work toward building more inclusive communities every day going forward from today. Thank you so much, Haben. As Haben shared, we do have, Haben will be at a booth outside for a little while. There have been 10 people selected to get a signed copy of her book. So some of those folks are coming to us. They're here today in person, and others are connecting via Zoom. And so we'll mail your copy of the signed book. And I look forward to getting to talk with all of you as well. We will have a wonderful, thank you so much for this wonderful evening, and have a great night.